Every instrument-rated pilot in America trusts a single federal table to tell them whether a wet runway will stop their airplane before the trees at the far end do. It is called the Runway Condition Assessment Matrix, the Matrix. You run the numbers before every wet landing. The Matrix says the runway is legal. The Matrix says you stop with room to spare. In May 2026, the National Transportation Safety Board put something in writing. The math behind that matrix is physically wrong. It has been wrong for 14 years. It has put 11 aircraft off the end of the runway, and the FAA had the crash reports the whole time. You trusted the numbers. The numbers do not stop the airplane. Physics does. This is not a story about one careless landing. This is a story about a federal document that models a physical process it does not understand. The RCAM is supposed to be the bridge between a weather report and a stopping distance. You read the field condition, you find the row, you read the braking action, you calculate. The whole system assumes that table tells the truth about friction. The NTSB just told the FAA in formal writing that it does not. The table treats wet braking as a straight line. The runway treats it as a cliff. That gap is where the airplanes go into the trees. Before we go further, I want a number from you. When you last landed on a wet, ungrooved strip, did you add any margin past the book figure, or did you trust the matrix straight? Drop it in the comments. If you want the engineering the aviation press will not run, the kind that reads the docket instead of the press release, subscribe to Sky Ranch. I have pulled enough wet runway accident reports to tell you what the friction does before the matrix admits it. The matrix is a brochure. The runway is the bench. We start now. May 3rd, 2019. A Boeing 737 lands at Naval Air Station Jacksonville on a flight operated as Miami Air Flight 293. It is raining hard. The rainfall rate runs 2 to 8 times above the FAA's own definition of heavy. The FAA calls anything over 0.3 inches per hour heavy rain. That night, the sky delivers multiples of it. On paper, the runway is legal. The crew runs the assessment. The matrix returns a stopping distance that fits the pavement. The airplane touches down. The airplane does not stop. It runs off the end and into the St. Johns River. The matrix said the runway would hold the airplane. The St. Johns River disagreed. Here is the part that should put a chill in you. Jacksonville was not a freak event. It was the 11th runway overrun in a 14-year pattern of the same failure mode. 11 times, aircraft landed on water-contaminated pavement and ran off the end. 11 times, the numbers said they would stop. 11 sets of investigators wrote up the same physics. The matrix never changed. The water is the killer. Not the rain on the windscreen, the film on the pavement. To understand why, you have to stop reading the matrix and start watching the tire. When your main gear touches a dry runway, rubber grips aggregate. The friction coefficient is high. The tire bites, the brakes load, the airplane decelerates. That is the world the matrix was built for. Now add water. A thin film builds on the surface. The tire has to push that film out of the way to reach the pavement. On a grooved runway, the grooves give the water somewhere to go. The water escapes, the rubber finds the asphalt. Thousands of general aviation strips have no grooves. Your home field is probably one of them. On ungrooved asphalt, the water has nowhere to escape. It sits, it builds, and it carries something with it. Every runway is coated in rubber deposits, dust, and spilled oil. Add water and that mix becomes a lubricating film. The tire rolls onto a surface that is no longer asphalt. It is a slick. This is viscous hydroplaning. A thin film of oil, dust, and water builds a barrier the tire cannot break through. The rubber never touches the pavement. The friction coefficient collapses. This is the lie inside the matrix. The FAA's math assumes braking action degrades in a straight line. A little more water, a little less friction, predictably, step by step. Physics does not work that way. Past a threshold, the friction does not fade. It falls off a cliff. The drop is exponential, not linear. That is why Jacksonville matters to your Cessna 182. You land that 182 on a wet, ungrooved 3,000-foot strip. You ran the book figure and added the matrix correction. You think you have margin. But the matrix never modeled the film you are rolling on. Your airplane is operating outside the bounds of the FAA's own physics. The trees at the far end do not negotiate with a federal table. Run the failure all the way to the wreck, and the bill arrives. A runway overrun rarely ends gently. You leave the paved surface at landing speed. The nose gear digs, the airframe twists, the prop strikes. A loss of control overrun writes off a $400,000 airframe in seconds. That is the hull. That is before the liability claim from whatever sits past the fence. And the insurer reads the same NTSB finding you are watching now. So here is the question while the mechanism is fresh. Which lands harder for you? That the friction collapses exponentially while the federal math draws a straight line? Or that 11 airplanes proved it before anyone fixed the table? Tell me below, because the worst part is not the physics. The worst part is the calendar. The NTSB did not discover viscous hydroplaning in 2026. It documented this exact failure mode in 2008. The board described how water film destroys braking on contaminated pavement. The mechanism was on the record 14 years before Jacksonville's report closed. The FAA had it. The matrix stayed the same. Read that. Again. The agency that owns the table was handed the physics in 2008. Instead of rebuilding the math, it leaned on something cheaper. It leaned on you. It relied on pilot intuition to cover the gap the matrix left open. The institution decided your gut would catch what its arithmetic missed. Pilot intuition is not a friction model. You cannot feel the film through the rudder pedals on short final. You feel it after touchdown when the deceleration does not come. By then, the airplane is committed. By then, the numbers are spent. The matrix handed you a calculation and quietly hoped you would not need it. That is not a safety document. That is a liability shield. Now the board is asking for something more honest. The NTSB wants new, granular rainfall descriptors in aviation weather reporting. Heavy rain is too vague to calculate survival. A single word covers everything from 0.3 inches per hour to 8 times that. That word fed the matrix at Jacksonville. That word was technically accurate and operationally useless. The board wants the report to say how hard it is actually raining, because the difference between heavy and torrential is the difference between stopping and swimming. Sit with what that request admits. The federal weather product cannot describe the one variable that drives the failure. The federal stopping table cannot model the friction collapse. And the gap between them is filled by a pilot guessing. The FAA possessed the data. It held the 11 reports. It read the 2008 mechanism. The matrix remained unchanged. This is the climax of every institutional failure I read. Not a villain. A decision. No single person at the FAA chose to put airplanes in the river. The agency built a table for a world with grooved runways and gentle rain. It applied that table to ungrooved strips in torrential water. Each step looked defensible on its own. Rewriting a federal matrix is slow, expensive, and politically heavy. Leaving it alone costs the agency nothing. It costs you the runway. The matrix functions exactly as designed. It produces a legal number. It does not produce a stopping airplane. The system is not broken. It is doing the cheapest possible thing with a known physical flaw. It accepted the flaw because fixing the paperwork is harder than burying it in a docket. 11 overruns is the price of that accounting. You are the line item. When you fly into a wet, ungrooved strip tomorrow, the matrix will still hand you a friendly number. The friction will still fall off a cliff. So here is what the mechanic does with this, because grief is not a plan. Stop treating the wet runway figure as a stopping distance. Treat it as the best case the FAA could legally print. On ungrooved pavement in real rain, the friction lives below the table. Add margin. The matrix never gave you. If the strip is ungrooved and the rain is heavy, factor your landing distance up hard, not by a fudge, by a refusal to trust the line. Pick a longer runway when the water is deep. Carry a higher go-around trigger and use it without ego. The trees do not care how current your logbook is. The film does not care that your number's closed. Watch the rainfall rate, not the word that describes it. Heavy is a label. The inches per hour are the physics. And know that the friction collapse is a law, not a forecast. What the FAA lost here is simpler than the engineering. It lost the one thing a stopping table is supposed to give a working pilot. Trust you can calculate against. For 14 years, the Matrix sold certainty it could not deliver. 11 crews paid the invoice, the table never itemized. The board finally put the physics on the record. The math is still on the cliff. The Matrix is not a safety calculation. It is a federal estimate with an airplane attached to it. When you line up on a wet, ungrooved strip and the rain is coming down in sheets, are you flying the FAA Matrix or are you flying the physics of the runway? One of them stops the airplane. The other one just signs off the paperwork. Tell me in the comments which one you trust. If Sky Ranch is where you come to read the docket, the aviation press won't, subscribe. More forensics are already on the bench.